my resolution that would overturn a rule from the Department of Treasury that affects the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund. Treasury's attempted sleight of hand to keep the COVID spending spigot on is an insult to Congress and those who believe that are in our Constitution, as well as a complete misuse of taxpayer dollars. As we vote today, we as a body must ask ourselves a couple of simple questions. First, are we going to allow funds meant for COVID recovery to be spent after the so-called quote-unquote emergency ended? Or are we finally able to install fiscal responsibility as our national debt spirals further out of control? And second, are we willing to defend the Article I branch from an overreaching agency and bureaucrats who want to claim more and more power for themselves? The spending in this program, which is hardly the point right now, actually, with this extension of the time, but it's worth noting, has been wasteful on many occasions. When Congress provided $350 billion for the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, I don't think one could imagine that the fund would have been used for golf courses and swimming pools and tennis courts, maybe to some. It also became a slush fund to incentivize illegal immigration. $340 million for cash payments to illegal immigrants in Washington State. $3.6 million in Illinois to help illegal immigrants apply for citizenship. $2 million in D.C. to help turn the District of Columbia into a quote-unquote proud sanctuary city. Regardless of whether you supported the spending or not, this fund had a specific purpose. This fund was designated to aid state governments and local governments with revenue shortfalls tied to the COVID-19 pandemic. When Congress created this fund, Congress provided a clear restriction. In statute, Congress required that all costs incurred with money from this fund must be incurred by December 31st, 2024. That is the statute, that's congressional language. In short, recipients had over 3 years to obligate this funding, or the funding would be returned to the federal treasury. Most states and localities understood the requirements. As of March of 2023, over a year ago, all states had obligated at least 60% of their funding, while localities had obligated over 54%. Yet, lo and behold, while most people in this body were celebrating Thanksgiving with our families, the Treasury Department tried to pull a fast one on the American people. The Treasury Department decided it knew better than this body and better than Congress, and the department rewrote the law to fit its own needs and special interests. Even though the statute said all costs must be incurred by the end of this calendar year, the Treasury Department decided that receipts could still use these COVID recovery dollars way past 2024. This is infuriating on a bunch of different levels. First, the administration ended the public health emergency for the pandemic on May 11th, 2023. Now, most Americans have moved on well beyond that, but even this administration acknowledged over a year ago that it was over. It's also crazy because even though this administration said COVID ended about a year ago, bureaucrats at the Treasury Department decided we should just keep spending money anyway, spending billions into 2025 and 2026 to recover from COVID. Just think about that for a second. But beyond this, beyond there being no rational reason to continue the spending for COVID recovery, this rule does not even keep the spigot on in order to directly benefit our constituents. This is bureaucrats giving a helping hand and a paycheck to, you guessed it, other bureaucrats. Earlier this week, Secretary Yellen attempted to assert that if this rule is overturned, and I heard this from my colleague, then infrastructure projects would grind to a halt. That is false. That is not true. This administration, once again, is using fear-mongering as a reckless tactics for a radical agenda. Let's be honest with the American people and look at the text of this rule. Under this new Treasury rule, the funding is limited to administrative and legal costs, such as compliance costs and internal control requirements. This rule ensures that funding does not go to bridges or broadband, but to bureaucrats. And this rule has real costs. This rule, if it continues, will cost taxpayers at least $13 billion, if not more. That boils down to about $1,200 for each and every American family. And around here, as I've learned, $13 billion doesn't seem like a lot of money to people, but we're $34 trillion in debt. We're spending nearly the same amount on interest payments on that debt as we do our national defense. This fiscal recklessness is unsustainable. The actions like this from the Treasury rule are a prime reason why we are $34 trillion in debt. Our constituents demand that we actually hold the line, that we stop spending beyond our means, especially when the rules encourage spending that is wasteful. I ask my colleagues to join me today in supporting this resolution. COVID is over. Our national debt is out of control. Inflation is sky high. It's time to reinstate fiscal responsibility here in the United States Senate. I yield back the remainder of my time, Mr. President. Ask for the yeas and nays.